My manager framed me to save his job. I lost everything until the surveillance footage resurfaced years later. The email arrived at 11:43 p.m. on a Friday, which should have been my first clue that something was catastrophically wrong. Subject line: Urgent security breach investigation. I was 3 beers deep into forgetting the worst week of my career when my phone lit up with that message from corporate. My hands were steady then. I remember that specifically because 20 minutes later, after I read what they were accusing me of, I couldn't hold my phone without it shaking like I was standing in an earthquake. They said I had stolen $73,000 from client accounts. They said there was proof. They said I had until Monday morning to respond before they involved law enforcement. I read it 5 times, then 6, waiting for the punchline that never came. I had been working as a senior financial analyst at Meridian Capital Group for 4 years when everything imploded. It was the kind of job that sounds impressive at dinner parties, but mostly involved staring at spreadsheets until your eyes burned and your back seized up from sitting too long. The pay was decent, the benefits were solid, and I had just bought my first house 6 months earlier. Nothing fancy, just a 3-bedroom ranch in the suburbs with a mortgage that made me nervous, but proud. My girlfriend Amy had moved in 3 weeks before all this started. We had been talking about getting engaged. I had the ring hidden in my sock drawer, waiting for the right moment that I kept chickening out on. Life was boring and stable, and exactly what I wanted after growing up watching my parents lose everything in the 2008 crash. My manager was a guy named Derek Thornton, 47 years old, 17 years with the company, vice president of client relations. He had this way of smiling that never quite reached his eyes, like he was always calculating something behind the friendly expression. But he was good at his job, or so I thought. He brought in major clients, closed deals that kept our department profitable, and the executives loved him. I reported directly to him, along with 3 other analysts. We were his team, his boys as he liked to call us during our weekly meetings. He would buy us drinks after particularly brutal weeks, tell war stories from his early days in finance, make us feel like we were part of something important. I trusted him completely, which was my first and biggest mistake. The accusation made no sense from any angle I examined it. The email claimed that between March and September of that year, I had systematically siphoned money from 12 different client accounts using a series of false transaction authorizations. They had my employee ID tied to every single fraudulent transfer. They had my digital signature on documents I had never seen before. They had login records showing access from my workstation during hours I was definitely sitting there, but I had no memory of processing those specific transactions. The amounts were small enough to avoid immediate red flags, 2,000 here, 800 there, but they added up to a number that could send me to federal prison. I called Amy into the room and showed her the email because I needed another human being to confirm I was not losing my mind. She read it twice, then looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was not quite doubt, not quite fear, but something in between that made my stomach drop 6 inches. She asked if there was any possibility I had made a mistake, processed something incorrectly, maybe had my credentials compromised. Her voice was careful, measured, like she was talking to a stranger who might explode. I told her no, absolutely not. There was 0 chance any of this was real. She wanted to believe me. I could see her trying to force her face into supportive shapes, but that initial flicker of uncertainty had already poisoned everything. We stayed up until 3 a.m. going through my work emails, my calendar, trying to find some explanation that made sense. We found nothing except the growing silence between us that felt like a third person sitting in the room. Monday morning hit like a freight train to the chest. I arrived at the office at 6:45 a.m., 90 minutes before anyone else, desperately needing to access my computer and find evidence that this was some kind of administrative error. The building security guard, Danny Reeves, a retired cop who usually waved me through with a joke about the weather, stopped me at the front desk with his hand up. He looked uncomfortable, would not meet my eyes directly. He told me my building access had been revoked and that I needed to wait in the lobby conference room. Corporate security was on their way. HR was on their way. I asked him what the hell was happening, and he just shook his head, said he was sorry, told me he was just following orders. The lobby conference room had glass walls, so everyone walking by could see me sitting there like a criminal waiting for interrogation. Laura Phillips arrived first. She was the HR director, 52 years old, 26 years with Meridian, and she had a reputation for being fair but absolutely ruthless when company interests were at stake. She carried a leather folder thick with papers and sat across from me with the kind of expression surgeons probably use when delivering bad news. She told me the company had been conducting an internal investigation for 6 weeks after irregularities were flagged during a routine audit. She said my name appeared repeatedly in connection with unauthorized transactions. She said they had tried to give me the benefit of the doubt, looked for alternative explanations, but the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. She slid a document across the table showing my employee credentials attached to transfer authorizations I had definitely never created. I tried to explain that someone must have stolen my login information, that this had to be identity theft or some kind of sophisticated hack. Laura listened with a neutral expression that gave away nothing. She asked if I had shared my password with anyone. I said no, never. She asked if I had written it down anywhere or saved it on my personal devices. I said no, I followed all the security protocols exactly. She asked if there was any reason someone would want to frame me. That question hung in the air for a long moment, because I honestly could not think of a single person who had a motive to destroy my life so completely. I was not important enough to have enemies. I did my work, stayed out of office politics, kept my head down. I was forgettable, which had always felt safe until that exact moment. Derek showed up 20 minutes later with 2 members of the corporate security team. He looked grave, disappointed, like a father whose son had just been arrested for drunk driving. He sat down next to Laura and told me how shocked he was, how he had vouched for me when the initial red flags appeared, how he felt personally betrayed by my actions. His performance was so convincing that for half a second, I almost wondered if I had somehow done this without remembering. He referenced specific conversations we had supposedly had about client account protocols, meetings where he claimed he had emphasized the importance of proper authorization procedures. I remembered those meetings, but I did not remember them the way he was describing them. He was subtly rewriting history in real time, and everyone in the room was buying it completely. The head of security, a former FBI agent named Richard Kowalski, with 30 years of experience in financial crimes, pulled out a laptop and showed me login records. My username, my employee ID, accessing the client management system at times that perfectly matched the fraudulent transactions. He walked me through a digital trail that looked absolutely damning if you did not know it was impossible. He asked me to explain how someone else could have accessed my credentials without leaving any other trace. I had no answer that sounded remotely plausible. I said it again. Someone stole my information. Someone set me up. Richard exchanged a look with Laura that said he had heard this defense 1,000 times from guilty people who thought they were clever. They suspended me immediately, effective that moment. No severance, no final paycheck beyond what I had already earned, no access to company systems or my personal files. I would be escorted to my desk to collect only personal items under supervision. They would be conducting a full forensic audit of my computer and all my work over the past year. They were referring the matter to law enforcement and recommended I retain legal counsel immediately. Laura handed me a packet of information about the company's investigation process and legal obligations. The whole meeting lasted 37 minutes. I had walked into that building as a trusted employee with a spotless record and walked out as a suspected thief who had betrayed everyone who believed in me. The escort back to my desk was humiliating in ways I still cannot fully articulate. Richard walked slightly behind me like I might try to run. Other employees were starting to arrive, greeting each other with coffee and weekend stories, and I could see them notice me being escorted through the office. The whispers started immediately. By lunchtime, everyone would know. By evening, the rumors would be fully inflated with details nobody had confirmed. My desk was in an open floor plan with 40 other workstations, which meant my shame was completely public. I grabbed my jacket, a photo of Amy and me from vacation, a coffee mug my sister had given me for my birthday. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the picture frame twice. Derek appeared at the edge of my cubicle as I was packing, playing the part of the disappointed mentor one more time. He said he hoped I would get the help I needed, that addiction and financial problems could make people do desperate things, that the company had resources for employees struggling with personal issues. I stopped moving and looked at him directly, maybe really looked at him for the first time. He held eye contact without blinking, his face arranged in an expression of sincere concern that felt rehearsed. I told him I did not do this. He nodded slowly, sadly, like that was exactly what he expected me to say. He told me to take care of myself and walked away. That was the moment I started to suspect this was not random, not a mistake, not a hack. This was deliberate, and he was the only person with both the access and the motive to pull it off. The motive part took me 3 days to piece together. I spent that first week in a haze of panic and denial, calling lawyers I could not afford, trying to explain to Amy why she should still believe in me, refreshing my email every 5 minutes waiting for someone to tell me this was all a horrible error. But then I remembered a conversation from 2 months earlier, late one Thursday night, when most of the office had cleared out. Derek had been in his office on a video call that got heated enough that his voice carried through the glass walls. I had been finishing up a quarterly report and could not help but overhear phrases like revenue targets, performance metrics, downsizing discussions. The executives were apparently concerned about our department's profitability. Derek was under pressure to show results or face restructuring. 3 weeks after that overheard conversation, Derek landed a massive new client, a private equity firm moving their portfolio management to Meridian. It was the kind of deal that would secure his position and probably earn him a significant bonus. He celebrated by taking the team out for expensive steaks and whiskey, toasting to our collective success. But I had been the primary analyst reviewing the preliminary documentation for that client, and something felt off about their financial history. There were gaps in their disclosure statements, inconsistencies in their investment timelines. I had mentioned it to Derek in a casual email, nothing accusatory, just flagging potential concerns for due diligence. He had thanked me for my attention to detail and said he would look into it. The client signed 2 weeks later. I never heard another word about my concerns. Now, sitting in my living room with my career in ruins, I pulled up that old email chain on my personal phone. I had forwarded the concerns to myself months ago as part of my general practice of keeping work records. The dates aligned perfectly. I had raised red flags about Derek's biggest client just weeks before the supposed theft began. If that client deal had fallen through because of compliance issues I had identified, Derek would have been finished. The executives were already watching him, questioning his department's performance. Losing a multi-million-dollar account over due diligence failures would have ended his career. But if I was gone, discredited, potentially facing criminal charges, who would question anything about that client or any other deals Derek had closed? I needed proof, but I had no access to company systems anymore and no way to verify my suspicions. Amy was pulling away more each day, the silence between us growing heavier. She never said she thought I was guilty, but she stopped touching me casually, stopped meeting my eyes for more than a second. Her parents called 3 times asking if she was okay, if she needed to come stay with them for a while. I could hear the concern in their voices bleeding through the phone. They had never trusted me completely, had always thought Amy could do better, and now their worst suspicions seemed confirmed. She started sleeping in the guest room, claiming she just needed space to think. The ring was still in my sock drawer, but it felt like evidence of a different person's life now. The legal consultations were nightmares of a different kind. I met with 4 different attorneys over 2 weeks, each one listening to my story with increasingly skeptical expressions. The evidence against me was substantial, they said. Digital records were hard to dispute, they explained. Claiming I was framed without proof was not a defense strategy, they warned. The costs started at $15,000 for basic representation and went up from there depending on how complicated the case became. I had maybe $8,000 in savings, and that was before my emergency fund became my only fund. The mortgage payment was due in 3 weeks, my health insurance was gone, the car payment was automatic withdrawal, and I had no income to cover it. Everything was unraveling at a speed that made strategic thinking impossible. Detective Angela Brennan from the Financial Crimes Unit called me on a Wednesday morning, identifying herself with the kind of calm authority that made my mouth go dry instantly. She was 41 years old, 16 years with the department, specialized in white-collar fraud. She wanted to ask me some questions about my employment at Meridian Capital Group. Completely voluntary, I was not under arrest, but she thought it would be in my best interest to come down to the station. I asked if I needed a lawyer present. She said that was my right, but this was just a preliminary conversation to get my side of things. Her tone suggested she had already decided my guilt, but was going through the motions of being thorough. I told her I would call her back after consulting with legal counsel. She said that was fine, but delay looked like consciousness of guilt. I hung up feeling like I was drowning in quicksand with no solid ground anywhere. I hired Thomas Brennan, no relation to the detective, a former prosecutor turned defense attorney with 23 years of experience. He cost $12,000 up front, which wiped out my savings and required a loan from my brother that came with awkward questions and barely concealed disappointment. Thomas reviewed the evidence Meridian had provided to law enforcement and delivered his assessment with brutal honesty. The digital trail was extremely damaging. My employee credentials were all over the fraudulent transactions. There were no obvious signs of system compromise or external hacking. A jury would likely believe I did this unless we could provide an alternative explanation with supporting evidence. He asked me directly if there was any possibility I had processed these transactions during a moment of poor judgment or under some kind of mental duress. I told him absolutely not. This was a frame job. Someone had stolen my access. He nodded and made notes, but I could see he was already calculating plea deal scenarios in his head. The formal charges came 6 weeks after my suspension. Wire fraud, theft by deception, identity fraud related to the forged authorization documents. Federal charges, which meant potentially years in prison if convicted. The arraignment was scheduled for a Monday morning at the federal courthouse. Thomas advised me to dress conservatively, speak only when directly addressed by the judge, show no emotion regardless of what the prosecution said. He warned me that the U.S. Attorney's Office had a 93% conviction rate in financial fraud cases. They did not bring charges unless they were confident in their evidence. Our best hope was negotiating a plea for reduced charges and minimal prison time. I asked him what happened if I insisted on fighting this, because I was actually innocent. He told me that innocent people go to prison all the time when the evidence looks bad enough. The system was not designed to find truth. It was designed to process cases efficiently. Amy left 4 days before my arraignment. I came home from a meeting with Thomas to find half the furniture gone and a note on the kitchen counter. She said she loved me, but could not do this. Could not attach her life to someone facing federal charges, could not handle the stress and the uncertainty and the constant questions from friends and family. She said she hoped I would understand, that she was not saying she thought I was guilty, just that she needed to protect herself. The note was 3 paragraphs long, handwritten on the back of a grocery receipt. She had taken her clothes, her books, the coffee maker, and any remaining benefit of the doubt. I sat on the floor of the empty living room for 2 hours, not crying, not moving, just existing in the space where my life used to be. The arraignment was exactly as humiliating as Thomas had warned. The prosecution outlined their case with cold efficiency, describing me as a trusted employee who had systematically stolen from clients over a 6-month period. They presented the digital evidence, the forged documents, the money trail showing deposits into an offshore account supposedly linked to me. That was new information. I did not have an offshore account. I had never opened anything beyond a basic checking and savings at the local credit union. Thomas made notes rapidly, underlining something 3 times. He argued for reasonable bail given my lack of criminal history and community ties. The judge set bail at $50,000, which required 10% cash and someone willing to co-sign. My brother agreed after a conversation that felt like swallowing glass. I walked out of the courthouse a free man in the technical sense only. The news coverage started that evening. Local reporter Lisa Chen, 6 years covering financial crime and corruption, ran a story about the Meridian case with my name featured prominently. The article described me as a former analyst accused of defrauding clients of significant sums. They included my LinkedIn photo, professional and smiling, which now looked sinister in context. The comment section filled with people who did not know me declaring I looked guilty, that white-collar criminals always thought they could get away with it, that I should face maximum penalties. My sister called crying, asking why this was happening, saying her kids were being bullied at school because their uncle was a thief. My mother stopped answering my calls completely. My father sent a one-line text, disappointed. That was all. Just one word that carried 30 years of complicated history. Derek was quoted in a follow-up article 2 days later, expressing shock and sadness about my alleged crimes. He said I had been a talented employee who showed so much promise. He said the company took its fiduciary responsibility seriously and cooperated fully with the investigation. He said they were reviewing all internal security protocols to prevent similar incidents. Reading his quotes made my teeth ache from clenching my jaw. He was using my destruction to position himself as a vigilant leader who had protected the company from a rogue employee. The executives were probably praising his handling of the crisis. He was turning my nightmare into his career advancement opportunity, and there was nothing I could do about it because I had no proof of anything. Thomas filed motions requesting full access to Meridian's server logs and security footage from my office floor. The company's legal team fought every request, claiming proprietary concerns and client confidentiality. The judge granted limited access, which meant we could review records directly related to the charges, but not conduct a phishing expedition through their entire system. Thomas brought in a forensic IT specialist, a woman named Diana Patel, with 18 years of experience in digital investigation and cybersecurity. She charged $300 an hour, which made my remaining credit card balance shrink at a terrifying rate. She reviewed what we could access and found exactly what I feared. Nothing obvious. Whoever had done this knew what they were doing. The trail looked clean, professional, almost perfect. Almost. Diana noticed something strange in the timestamp data. The fraudulent transactions occurred during business hours when I was logged into the system, but the keystroke patterns did not match my normal typing rhythm. She explained that everyone has a unique pattern in how they type. The speed, the common errors, the rhythm of hitting keys. It was like a fingerprint. The transactions showed someone typing significantly faster than my average speed and making different kinds of errors. It was not conclusive proof of anything, but it was the first piece of evidence suggesting someone else had used my credentials. Thomas filed a supplemental brief highlighting this finding. The prosecution dismissed it as speculative junk science. The judge seemed unimpressed. We needed more, but we had nowhere else to look. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for early December, 3 months after my world had collapsed. I had lost 22 pounds, not from any intentional diet, but because food tasted like cardboard, and eating felt like wasting time I should spend finding evidence. I was living on credit cards and my brother's charity. The house was heading toward foreclosure because I had missed 2 mortgage payments. Job applications went nowhere once potential employers ran background checks and found pending federal charges. I was unemployable, broke, alone, and staring at the strong probability of prison. Thomas kept pushing plea deal conversations, suggesting that 5 years with good behavior was better than risking 15 after a trial. I kept refusing because accepting the deal meant admitting I did something I did not do, and that felt like dying while still breathing. Then Diana found the gap. She was reviewing server logs for the 100th time, cross-referencing timestamps with security badge data. When she noticed that on 7 different occasions, transactions had been processed under my credentials, while my badge showed me logged into the system from a different physical location. The company had badge readers at every secure door, tracking employee movements for safety and security. On April 14th, a fraudulent transaction was processed from my workstation at 2:18 p.m., but my badge had accessed the 3rd floor supply room at 2:16 p.m. and stayed there until 2:23 p.m. I had been restocking printer paper, a mundane task that suddenly became an alibi. The same pattern appeared 6 more times across different dates. Someone had been at my desk using my computer while I was physically somewhere else in the building. This was not proof of who did it, but it was proof that I did not do it. Thomas immediately filed an emergency motion to dismiss based on the new evidence. The prosecution fought back, arguing that badge data could be manipulated or that I could have let someone use my workstation, which would still make me criminally liable. The judge ordered a full forensic review of the badge system and scheduled another hearing for January. Diana started pulling thread after thread, requesting data on who else had badge access near my workstation during those specific times. Meridian's legal team stonewalled, claiming the data was corrupted or unavailable. Thomas filed a motion to compel, arguing that the company was obstructing justice. The whole process felt like swimming through concrete, every inch of progress taking weeks of legal warfare. Christmas came and went. I spent it alone in a house that felt more like a crime scene than a home. My brother invited me to his family celebration, but I could not face the pity and awkward small talk. My sister sent a card with no return address. My parents sent nothing. Amy was dating someone new according to her Instagram, which I had not blocked despite knowing I should. She looked happy in her photos, smiling on ski trips and at wine bars, living a life uncontaminated by my disaster. I did not blame her, not really. She had escaped a sinking ship while there was still time. I was the one who stayed aboard, insisting the water was not that deep, that rescue was definitely coming, that this could not possibly end with me drowning. The forensic review results came back in mid-January, with findings that made Thomas actually smile for the first time since I had hired him. The badge data was authentic and unmanipulated. The timestamps were accurate. I had definitely been away from my desk during those 7 transactions, but more importantly, Diana had found something else. During those same time frames, only 4 other employees had badge access within proximity to my workstation. 2 were in different parts of the building during at least 5 of the 7 incidents. The third was on vacation during 3 of them. That left exactly 1 person whose badge consistently showed them near my desk at the exact times fraudulent transactions were being processed: Derek Thornton, my manager, the man who had access to everything, who understood the system completely, who had every reason to need a scapegoat for his failing performance. The prosecution was less enthusiastic than we hoped. They argued that proximity did not equal guilt, that Derek had legitimate reasons to be near employee workstations, that this was still circumstantial. But their tone had shifted. They were no longer pushing for trial. They started talking about needing to investigate further, about wanting to re-interview witnesses, about reconsidering timelines. The U.S. attorney assigned to the case, Michael Torres, with 12 years of experience prosecuting financial crimes, asked for a continuance. The judge granted it, with a warning that the charges against me needed to either proceed to trial or be dropped within 60 days. Thomas told me to stay calm, that we were winning, but not to celebrate yet because winning in this context just meant not going to prison for crimes I did not commit. Diana went deeper into Derek's digital footprint, looking for any trace of how he had accessed my credentials. She found it buried in IT support ticket logs from 8 months earlier. I had called the help desk about a computer issue, something about my email client freezing. The IT tech had remotely accessed my workstation to fix the problem, which was standard procedure. The session log showed the issue was resolved in 14 minutes. But Diana found backup logs that showed my workstation had been accessed remotely 2 more times that same day, after the IT ticket was closed, using administrator credentials that belonged to Derek. He had manager-level admin access for his department, which he used for legitimate purposes like approving time-off requests and system updates. He had used that same access to get into my computer, probably installing keylogger software that captured my password. Then, he had simply used my credentials to process the fraudulent transactions whenever I stepped away from my desk. Thomas presented this evidence to the prosecution in a meeting that lasted 3 hours. Michael Torres listened with the expression of someone who had just realized he had almost sent an innocent man to prison. The digital trail was clear, the timeline was coherent, the motive was apparent once you knew to look for it. Derek had been covering up problems with the private equity client, possibly other clients too, and needed someone to blame before auditors found the irregularities. He had set me up systematically, carefully, with the kind of planning that suggested he had considered this option months in advance. Thomas demanded immediate dismissal of all charges against me and suggested the investigation should pivot entirely to Derek Thornton. Michael agreed to the dismissal, but cautioned that building a case against Derek would take time. Companies were careful about protecting executives, especially ones who brought in revenue. This was going to be complicated. The charges against me were formally dropped on February 3rd, 9 months after the email that had destroyed my life. The judge was apologetic, which felt insufficient, but was probably the best I could expect from the system. Thomas held a brief press conference outside the courthouse, explaining that I had been the victim of fraud myself, that the real perpetrator was being investigated, that justice had ultimately prevailed. The local news covered it for one night. The comment sections were quieter this time, less enthusiastic about defending my innocence than they had been about declaring my guilt. People moved on quickly to the next scandal, the next outrage. I was yesterday's news with no closure, no apology, no compensation for everything I had lost. But I was not done, because being proven innocent was not the same as being made whole. I had lost my job, my savings, my girlfriend, my reputation, my family's trust, and 9 months of my life to stress that probably took years off my lifespan. Derek was still employed, still collecting his salary, still playing the part of a respected executive while the investigation moved at bureaucratic speed. Meridian had issued no public statement about my exoneration, no correction to the articles that had branded me a thief, no acknowledgement that they had nearly helped send an innocent man to prison. Thomas filed a civil lawsuit against both Derek personally and Meridian Capital Group, alleging wrongful termination, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy. The damages we sought were substantial. The likelihood of actually collecting any money was uncertain. The criminal investigation into Derek gained traction when federal agents executed a search warrant on his home and office. They found the administrator access logs, email chains discussing client issues, evidence that he had been falsifying performance reports to his superiors for over a year. The private equity client I had flagged turned out to be even worse than I had suspected. They were involved in a separate securities fraud scheme, and Derek had known about the red flags, but signed them anyway because he needed the commission. When auditors started asking questions, he had panicked and found the nearest scapegoat. That scapegoat happened to be me, the analyst who had been inconveniently honest about potential problems. The whole scheme was larger than anyone had initially realized, involving multiple fraudulent transactions and several compromised accounts beyond the ones attributed to me. Derek was arrested in April, 14 months after my nightmare began. The news covered it with the same breathless energy they had used for my arraignment, but this time, the villain was different. Former vice president arrested in fraud scheme, the headlines read. He made bail immediately, hired expensive lawyers who made statements about fighting baseless charges and presumption of innocence. I watched the coverage with a satisfaction that felt incomplete because nothing they did to him would give me back what I had lost. He would probably plea down to reduced charges, serve minimal time in a white-collar prison that was basically summer camp, and eventually resume some version of his life. Meanwhile, I was still living in a house I was about to lose, still unemployed, still radioactive to potential employers who found news articles when they searched my name. The civil case moved slowly, which Thomas warned me about from the beginning. Meridian's lawyers filed motions to dismiss, claiming they had acted in good faith based on evidence available at the time, that they had no obligation to keep me employed during a fraud investigation, that my reputation damage was self-inflicted by being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Their defense was essentially that being framed by one of their executives was my problem, not theirs. The judge allowed most of the case to proceed, which Thomas called a minor miracle in corporate litigation. We entered discovery, which meant months of document requests and depositions and legal bills that climbed, despite Thomas working at a reduced rate. The meter was still running on my debt, my future, my ability to ever recover financially from this disaster. Then the surveillance footage surfaced. Meridian had claimed during discovery that security footage from the relevant time period had been automatically deleted after 90 days per their data retention policy. But Diana kept digging through subpoenaed backup logs and found references to an archived server that the company had not disclosed. Thomas filed another motion to compel, threatening sanctions for hiding evidence. The company's lawyers claimed it was an honest oversight, that the backup server had been decommissioned and they had forgotten about its existence. The judge was not amused. He ordered immediate access to all archived data under penalty of contempt. What they found changed everything completely. The backup server contained security camera footage from the office floor, preserved for over 2 years, because someone in IT had been hoarding data before the server was supposedly shut down. Diana recovered footage from 6 of the 7 instances when transactions were processed while I was away from my desk. The video showed exactly what the badge data had suggested. There was Derek, standing at my workstation, typing on my computer, processing transactions while glancing around to make sure no one was watching. On April 14th, the camera caught him looking directly toward the supply room where I had gone for printer paper. He had waited until I left, moved to my desk, spent 4 minutes on my computer, and returned to his office. The footage was clear, time-stamped, and absolutely damning. Thomas sent copies to both the prosecution and Meridian's legal team with a cover letter that barely concealed his fury. The subject line was, "Evidence your client claimed did not exist." He demanded immediate settlement negotiations, or he would release the footage to every media outlet in the state. The prosecution moved to amend Derek's charges to include identity theft, computer fraud, and obstruction of justice. His bail was revoked. He was remanded to custody pending trial. Meridian's lawyers requested an emergency meeting. Their tone had shifted from combative to desperate. They could see exactly where this was heading, and it looked like a public relations catastrophe combined with massive financial liability. The settlement negotiations took 3 weeks. Meridian offered $200,000 to make the lawsuit go away, with a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from discussing the details publicly. Thomas laughed at them and countered with $2.4 million plus a full public apology and correction of all news coverage. We went back and forth, the number climbing each time they tried to lowball me. They were terrified of the case going to trial, terrified of a jury seeing that video footage and hearing about how their VP had systematically destroyed an innocent employee to cover his own crimes. They were terrified of discovery revealing what other problems might be lurking in their client accounts. We finally settled at $1.8 million, no NDA, and a requirement that they issue a public statement acknowledging my complete innocence and their failure to properly investigate before destroying my career. The public statement came out on a Monday morning in August, almost 2 years after the original email that had started everything. Meridian acknowledged that I had been wrongfully accused and terminated due to fraudulent actions by a former executive. They apologized for the harm caused to my reputation and livelihood. They announced changes to their internal security protocols and oversight procedures. The statement was corporate boilerplate mostly, but it existed in print and online, a permanent correction to the record. Thomas made sure it got picked up by every outlet that had covered my original arrest. Former analyst exonerated, received settlement after being framed, the new headlines read. The comment sections were predictably split between people apologizing for rushing to judgment and people insisting I had probably done something wrong anyway to deserve suspicion. The internet never fully forgives or forgets. It just moves on to the next target while leaving your digital scarring permanently visible. Derek pleaded guilty to 11 federal charges in October as part of a deal that gave him 7 years in prison, restitution to defrauded clients, and permanent prohibition from working in the financial industry. His wife filed for divorce. His kids stopped talking to him according to mutual acquaintances who still gossiped about the whole situation. His house was sold to cover legal fees and restitution payments. Everything he had stolen from me and others was stripped away systematically by a system that moved slowly but eventually landed exactly where it should. I watched his sentencing on the courthouse live stream, sitting in my new apartment that I had bought with settlement money, feeling nothing close to satisfaction. Watching him get sentenced did not erase the months of terror, the destroyed relationships, the permanent wariness I now felt toward trusting anyone in a professional context. Justice had arrived, but it looked different than I had imagined during all those dark nights when I was certain my life was permanently over. I used part of the settlement to pay back my brother with interest he refused to accept until I threatened to donate his portion to charity. I paid off every credit card, every loan, every debt that had accumulated during the nightmare. I bought a small 2-bedroom apartment in a different part of the city, where no one knew my history or my face from news coverage. I started therapy with a psychologist named Dr. Jennifer Rothman, who specialized in trauma and PTSD, because apparently getting framed for federal crimes qualified as trauma even though I had never been physically hurt. She helped me understand that the hypervigilance, the difficulty sleeping, the panic when I saw police officers, were all normal responses to abnormal circumstances. She gave me tools to manage the anxiety that showed up at random moments, like when I had to sign legal documents or received unexpected emails from unknown senders. The job search was harder than expected because Google never forgets, and articles about my case still appeared in search results despite the correction and settlement. Employers got nervous when they read about fraud charges, even when they also read about exoneration. I finally landed a position at a small nonprofit doing financial analysis for community development projects, work that felt meaningful but paid significantly less than my corporate salary. I did not care about the pay cut, because the organization's mission actually mattered, and my boss, a woman named Patricia Levine, who ran the nonprofit for 8 years, had also been wrongfully accused of embezzlement early in her career. She understood exactly what I had been through without me having to explain the invisible ways it had changed me. She gave me a chance when most people saw me as damaged goods. Amy reached out about a year after the settlement, sending a message through social media saying she had seen the news and wanted to apologize for not standing by me. She said she had been scared and overwhelmed and made the easy choice instead of the right one. She said she hoped I was doing well and maybe we could get coffee sometime to talk. I read the message 3 times and then deleted it without responding because some doors close so permanently that trying to reopen them just damages the frame. I did not hate her, did not wish her harm, but I also could not forget that moment when I had needed someone to believe in me and she had chosen herself. That was her right, her survival instinct, but it was also a boundary that could not be uncrossed. We were strangers now who happened to share a history neither of us wanted to revisit in detail. My relationship with my family recovered slowly, awkwardly, through monthly dinners that felt forced until they gradually started feeling normal again. My mother apologized through tears during Thanksgiving dinner, saying she should have believed me, should have stood by me regardless of how bad things looked. My father never explicitly apologized, but started calling weekly to check in, which was his version of saying he had been wrong. My sister brought her kids over to my apartment and explained to them that their uncle had been wrongly accused and everything was okay now. The kids accepted this with the easy resilience of childhood and immediately asked if I had video games they could play. We rebuilt trust in small increments, family events, and regular phone calls, and the gradual understanding that I was still the person I had always been, just carrying new scars. The surveillance footage that had saved me ended up having wider implications than anyone expected. Meridian's board of directors launched a comprehensive internal investigation after my case became public, discovering that Derek had not been the only executive cutting corners and hiding problems. 3 other VPs were quietly forced out over a 6-month period as auditors found irregularities in multiple departments. The company paid millions in fines and settlement fees to various clients and employees. Their stock price dropped 19%. Their CEO eventually resigned under pressure. The whole organization had been built on a culture that valued revenue over ethics, profits over people, and when one thread got pulled, the entire garment started unraveling. My case had been the thread, the lucky accident that exposed systemic problems that might have continued for years otherwise. I think about Derek sometimes, sitting in his federal prison cell, probably still convincing himself that he was the real victim in all this. The mind does amazing things to protect itself from accountability. He probably tells himself that I would have done the same thing in his position, that everyone cuts corners when their career is on the line, that he just got caught while others got away with it. He probably believes his own narrative by now, rewritten and polished until he is the protagonist fighting against an unfair system. I hope prison is uncomfortable for him. I hope he has years to think about what he destroyed for the sake of protecting his salary and status. But mostly, I do not think about him at all, because the best revenge is living well, and he no longer gets space in my head unless I specifically choose to give it. The settlement money gave me options I had never expected to have. I invested most of it conservatively, set aside enough to live comfortably for several years even on a non-profit salary, and donated a substantial amount to organizations that help people facing wrongful accusations and legal fees they cannot afford. I had been lucky to have a brother who could loan me money and a lawyer who believed in my case enough to reduce his fees. Most people in my situation have none of those advantages. They take plea deals to avoid trial, accept false guilt to minimize prison time, carry criminal records for crimes they did not commit because the system is too expensive and too slow and too weighted against anyone without resources. I had barely escaped that fate, and the knowledge of how close I had come haunted me in productive ways. 3 years after everything started, I went on a first date with a teacher named Rebecca, who knew nothing about my history beyond what I chose to tell her over coffee. She taught high school English, loved hiking and mystery novels, laughed easily at self-deprecating humor. I told her everything on the third date because honesty felt mandatory after what I had been through, expecting her to politely exit my life before things got serious. She listened to the whole story without interrupting, asked thoughtful questions, and then said that surviving something like that probably meant I was stronger than most people she had met. She was not scared off by my past. She was curious about my character, my resilience, the ways I had chosen to move forward. We took things slow, built trust gradually, and eventually she became someone I could imagine a future with. I still have bad days when the anxiety spikes for no apparent reason, when I double-check locks multiple times or avoid opening emails from unknown senders. Dr. Rothman says that is normal trauma response and will likely fade over years, but never completely disappear. The experience rewired parts of my brain that cannot be unwired, made me cautious in ways I had not been before. But I also have good days now, more of them than bad. Days when I laugh without thinking about what I lost. Days when I feel genuinely lucky to have survived something that destroys some people completely. The surveillance footage saved me, but I saved myself too by refusing to accept guilt for crimes I did not commit, by fighting when fighting seemed pointless, by surviving long enough for truth to eventually surface. Derek got exactly what he deserved. He lost his job, his freedom, his family, his reputation, everything he thought made his life worth living. The video evidence that resurfaced years later became the weapon that destroyed him as thoroughly as he had tried to destroy me. Sometimes justice takes time to arrive, but it lands with precision when it finally shows up. I do not celebrate his suffering because I am not built that way, but I do acknowledge the satisfaction of watching consequences find someone who thought they were too smart to face them. He gambled that I would be convicted and disappeared, that no one would ever look closely enough to find the truth. He lost that gamble catastrophically. I keep a copy of the settlement agreement in my desk drawer, not because I need the money anymore, but because the document represents something important about perseverance and truth. The paper trail that nearly convicted me eventually exonerated me once someone cared enough to look at it correctly. The same surveillance system that was supposed to be deleted became the evidence that exposed everything. Technology cut both ways, and in my case, it finally cut in the direction of justice. That document reminds me that reality is stubborn, that lies eventually collapse under the weight of contradictions, that truth has a way of surfacing when you refuse to let the system bury you. The story makes the rounds sometimes in financial industry circles, a cautionary tale about executive fraud and the importance of proper oversight. I hear about it occasionally from former colleagues who reach out to reconnect, their messages carrying apologies and admiration for how I handled everything. Most of them had believed I was guilty when the news first broke. They had accepted the official story without question, because questioning authority felt risky and uncomfortable. Now they know better, or at least they claim to. I accept their apologies without holding grudges because grudges are heavy and I am tired of carrying unnecessary weight. My new life is smaller and quieter than what I had before, but it feels more authentic. The nonprofit work connects me to real people facing real struggles, not just abstract numbers on spreadsheets representing theoretical returns. I help families secure funding for housing, analyze budgets for community health programs, make sense of grant requirements that seem designed to confuse. The impact is visible and immediate. Patricia tells me I am good at this work, that my attention to detail and unwillingness to cut corners makes me valuable. She has no idea how much those qualities nearly destroyed my life, or maybe she understands perfectly because she lived through her own version of the same nightmare. We do not talk about our past traumas explicitly, but they inform how we run the organization, the care we take with documentation, the assumption that people are innocent until proven otherwise. Rebecca moved in with me 6 months ago, after a year of dating that felt like slowly learning to trust again. She knows all my triggers, the ways sudden stress makes me withdraw, how I need space sometimes to process anxiety that shows up uninvited. She handles it with patience that feels like a gift I do not deserve, but accept anyway. We talk about getting married eventually, but there is no rush. The ring I bought for Amy stayed in my sock drawer for a year before I finally sold it, using the money to take Rebecca on a vacation to Colorado, where we hiked mountains and she laughed at my fear of heights. I bought a new ring months later, different style, different meaning, waiting for the right moment that I am less scared of now. The house I almost lost to foreclosure sold eventually, bought by a young couple with a baby on the way who saw it as their dream starter home. I hope they have better luck there than I did. I hope their lives stay boring and stable and free from sudden emails that arrive late at night carrying accusations designed to destroy everything. My new apartment has better locks and a security system that is probably excessive, but Dr. Rothman says feeling safe is worth the cost, even if the threat is mostly psychological. I have neighbors who nod hello in the elevator without knowing my history, without Googling my name or asking uncomfortable questions. That anonymity feels precious after years of being recognizable as the guy from the news. The criminal justice system failed me in countless ways before eventually stumbling towards something resembling justice. It took too long, cost too much, and required luck I did not deserve. Most people in my situation do not get lucky. They lose at trial or accept plea deals or spend years in prison before exoneration efforts maybe succeed. The system is not designed to protect innocence. It is designed to secure convictions efficiently. I won because Diana found the evidence, because Thomas fought aggressively, because the surveillance footage survived deletion, because Derek got sloppy. None of those factors had anything to do with the justice system working as intended. I won despite the system, not because of it. But I did win, eventually, undeniably. The video footage that resurfaced years later became the proof that changed everything, the evidence that could not be argued away or dismissed. Derek Thornton is in prison where he belongs. Meridian Capital Group paid for their failure to properly vet their executives and investigate before destroying an employee. The public record now shows my innocence clearly, permanently, for anyone who cares to look. These things do not undo the damage, but they prevent additional damage from continuing. They draw a line marking the end of one chapter and the possibility of beginning another. I am 36 years old now, sitting in an apartment I own in a city that does not carry bad memories, doing work that matters to people who need help, loving someone who knows my worst story and chose to stay anyway. This is not the life I imagined before Derek sent that email, but it is a life I built from rubble after everything burned down. Some days I am angry about the years stolen from me. Some days I am grateful just to be free and vindicated. Most days I try not to think about it too much, try to focus on the present instead of the past. Try to believe that surviving something terrible can make you capable of building something good. The surveillance footage saved me, but I saved me too. That is the part I hold on to when the darkness tries to creep back in. I saved myself by refusing to disappear. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.